Sometimes the moment itself is only the beginning. What happened may have changed you, shaped you, or left you searching for answers, but meaning comes later. In this episode, I reflect on the difference between justifying what happened and finding a way to understand its place in your story. This is a gentle invitation to own your experience without letting it become the only thing that defines you.
Welcome to Not Just a Story with Rose Davidson, where lived experience becomes meaning and stories create impact.
Hello and welcome to Not Just a Story. I'm Rose Davidson, and this is the place where we explore the moments that shape us, the stories we carry, and the meaning we make from lived experience. Today's episode is called The Moment Your Story Began to Mean Something. This is the final episode in this 10-part series about the journey from being seen, ignoring the signs, knowing the truth, staying, paying the cost, breaking, stopping the explanations, choosing yourself, finding your voice, and turning survival into meaning. Not rushing people into sharing their story. It helps them to understand their story first. The series is about the moments no one sees that are often the moments that change everything. And I want to begin this episode gently because this is not always an easy place to arrive. There are some things that happen in life that don't make sense when they're happening. They feel unfair, confusing, painful, disruptive. Sometimes they feel like they have taken something from us. Sometimes they change how we see ourselves. And sometimes they leave us asking questions we can't answer for years. Why did this happen? Why did I stay? Why did I leave? Why did I react that way? Why did no one notice? Why did no one help? Why did I have to become that version of myself to survive? And then somewhere along the way, often much later, something begins to shift. Not because what happened becomes okay, and not because we suddenly understand everything, and not because the pain disappears, but because we begin to see this experience differently. We begin to ask a different question. Not only, what happened to me? But, what does this mean now? That is the space we are sitting in today, the space between experience and purpose. The space where a story doesn't have to end with the moment itself, but begins to deepen when we give it meaning. Before we go any further, I want to say something very clearly. Finding meaning does not mean justifying what happened. It does not mean excusing someone else's behaviour. It does not mean pretending the pain was necessary. And it does not mean saying everything happens for a reason when something was harmful, cruel, unfair, or deeply wrong. I think that phrase can sometimes land very heavily on people who have lived through hard things. Because when someone says everything happens for a reason, it can feel like they're asking you to make peace with something before you're ready. It can feel like they're wrapping your pain in a neat little bow. It can feel like they're trying to hurry you towards acceptance. But some things should not be hurried. Some things need time. Some things need space. Some things need to be named before they can even be understood. Meaning is not the same as justification. Meaning does not say it was okay. Meaning says, this happened and I'm allowed to decide what I do with the truth of it. That is very different. There is power in that difference, because when something happens to us, especially something painful or life-changing, it can feel as though the story has been written for us. Other people may tell their version. They may misunderstand. They may minimise. They may blame. They may look away. They may decide who we're based on one chapter, one reaction, one season, or one moment when we're barely holding ourselves together. But when that happens, it can feel like we have lost ownership of our own story. We can start to believe the version that others have created. We can start to define ourselves by what happened. The broken one, the difficult one, the one who failed, the one who stayed too long, the one who left, the one who fell apart, the one who couldn't cope, or the one who changed. But your story is not only what happened. Your story is also what you noticed, what you carried, what you learned, what you questioned, what you survived, what you chose, what you're still making sense of, what you're beginning to understand differently now. And sometimes meaning begins in the smallest of ways. It may not arrive as a grand revelation. It may not come with certainty. And it may not feel inspiring at first. Sometimes meaning begins with a quiet sentence inside you. I understand now why I reacted that way. I can see now how much I was carrying. I know now that I was doing the best I could. I didn't deserve what happened. I was not weak. I was surviving. I'm allowed to tell this differently now. Those moments matter. They may seem small from the outside, but inside a person they can be enormous. Because meaning often begins when shame starts to loosen its grip. For many people, the hardest part of a story is not only what happened, it's what they made it mean about themselves. Maybe you made it mean you were not enough. Maybe you made it mean you were too much. Maybe you made it mean you were hard to love. Maybe you made it mean you should have known better. Maybe you made it mean your voice didn't matter. Or maybe you made it mean you were powerless. And sometimes without realising it, we carry those meanings for years. They shape the way we speak, the way we trust, the way we show up, the way we hide, the way we protect ourselves, the way we apologise for existing. Then one day we begin to question the meaning we inherited. We begin to ask, is that really true? Was I really weak or was I exhausted? Was I really dramatic or was I unheard for a long time? Was I really difficult or was I responding to something painful? Was I really lost or was I trying to find a way through? Was I really broken or did something in me finally say, I can't keep living like this? That is where integration begins. Integration is not about forgetting, and it's not about forcing yourself to move on. And it's not about becoming someone who never hurts again. Integration is the slow process of bringing the pieces of your story into the same room. The painful parts, the strong parts, the confused parts, the parts you're proud of, the parts you still struggle to look at, the parts that make sense now, and the parts that may never fully make sense. It is being able to say, this part of my story, but it's not the whole of me. That sentence can be life-changing. This is part of my story, but it's not the whole of me. Because when we are inside an experience, it can feel like it is all we are. Grief can make us feel like we are only loss. Abuse can make us feel like we are only damage. Failure can make us feel like we are only disappointment. Burnout can make us feel like we are only weakness. And fear can make us feel like we are only avoidance. But you are never only the hardest thing you have lived through. You are also the person who kept breathing, the person who learned to adapt, the person who found ways to cope, the person who carried on when things were not simple, the person who is still here, still reflecting, still wondering what this story might become. And I think this is where lived experience can become something very powerful. Not because we rush to turn pain into a lesson, not because every wound has to become content, not because every private experience has to be shared publicly, but because we are ready. Our experience has become a source of wisdom. It can teach us what matters. It can sharpen our compassion. It can show us where systems fail people. It can help us recognise someone else's silence. It can make us more honest. It can make us braver in the places where we once felt voiceless. It can become impact. And impact does not always mean a stage, a podcast, a book, or a public platform. Sometimes impact is a quiet conversation. Sometimes impact is the way you listen to someone else without rushing them. Sometimes impact is saying, I believe you. Sometimes impact is changing how you speak to yourself. Sometimes impact is breaking a pattern in your own family. Sometimes impact is choosing not to pass your pain on. Sometimes impact is telling the truth in a room where everyone else is pretending. And sometimes impact is simply being the person you needed when you were younger. That matters. It all matters. One of the things I've learned through story work is that people often think their story needs to be dramatic to matter. They think it needs a clear beginning, middle and end. They think it needs a neat lesson. They think they need to be fully healed before they can speak. But lived experience is rarely that tidy. Often we are still making sense of it as we speak. Often we are still noticing new layers. Often the meaning changes as we change. What sometimes meant at 20 may not be what it means at 40. What something meant in the middle of survival may not be what it means once you have space to breathe. What sometimes meant when you were ashamed may not be what it means when you finally offer yourself compassion. Meaning can evolve. And you are allowed to let it evolve. You are allowed to tell your story differently as your understanding deepens. You're allowed to say, I used to think this was my fault, but I do not believe that anymore. You're allowed to say, I used to think I'd failed, but now I see I was changing direction. You are allowed to say, I used to think this was the end of me, but maybe it was the beginning of a different version of me. You're allowed to grow into a new meaning. There is something deeply freeing about that, because so many people are trapped inside old interpretations of their own life. They are still living under meanings formed in fear, meanings formed in grief, meanings formed in shame, meanings formed by people who never truly saw them. And part of reclaiming a story is asking, who gave me this meaning? Did I choose it? Or was it handed to me? Was it shaped by someone else's judgment? Was it shaped by silence? Was it shaped by a time when I had no support? Was it shaped by a younger version of me who was just trying to survive? There is tenderness in that question because often the meanings we carry were not chosen consciously. They were formed in the moment. A child makes meaning from what they can't understand. A frightened person makes meaning from what they can't control. A grieving person makes meaning from what they can't change. A person in survival mode makes meaning from whatever helps them get through the day. So if you're listening to this and you realise you've been carrying a harsh meaning about yourself, please be gentle. You are not foolish for believing it. You were trying to understand your life with the tools you had at the time. But perhaps now you have different tools. Perhaps now there is room for a softer truth. Perhaps now the story can hold more than pain. Perhaps now you can say, that happened, but it doesn't get to decide everything about me. This is where purpose can begin. Purpose does not have to be loud. It does not have to become a business, a movement, or a mission, although sometimes it does. Purpose can simply be the decision to live with more truth, to speak with more honesty, to stop hiding from the parts of yourself that were never shameful in the first place, to use what you know to bring more care into the world. Purpose can be private before it is public. It can begin inside your own heart. It can begin when you stop asking, what's wrong with me? And start asking, what happened? What did it teach me? And how do I want to carry it now? That is a powerful shift. From experience to purpose. From being shaped by something so consciously deciding how it will live inside your story. And again, this doesn't mean the experience was good. And it doesn't mean you are grateful for the pain. It doesn't mean you would choose it. It means you were choosing not to let it have the final word. There is dignity in that. There is strength in that. There is agency in that. One of the most beautiful things about meaning is that it can return us to ourselves. Not the same self we were before. Sometimes that self is gone. Sometimes life changes us so much for that. But meaning can help us meet the person we are becoming. It can help us recognise that we are not only a collection of wounds, we are also a collection of insights, of choices, of questions, of moments of courage, of tenderness, of hard-won wisdom, of unfinished becoming. And maybe that is what story really is. Not a perfect account of what happened, not a performance, not a polished version of pain, but a bridge between who we were then and who we are now. A bridge between silence and expression. A bridge between confusion and clarity. A bridge between experience and impact. When we give meaning to our story, we are not rewriting the facts. We are reclaiming our relationship with them. We're saying, I get to decide how I understand this. I get to decide what I carry forward. I get to decide what I release. I get to decide whether this story becomes a prison, a wound, a warning, a lesson, a doorway, or a gift. And sometimes it may be all of those things at different times, and that's okay too. You don't have to force your story into one meaning. Some stories are complicated. Some stories hold grief and gratitude, anger and wisdom, loss and growth, pain and purpose. You are allowed to hold complexity. You're allowed to say, this hurt me and it taught me something. You're allowed to say, I wish it had been different, and I can still use what I know now. You're allowed to say, I am still healing and I still have something valuable to offer. You don't have to wait until you are perfectly healed to matter. You don't have to have every answer before your story has value. Sometimes the honest, unfinished story is the one someone else most needs to hear. Not because it gives them a formula, but because it gives them company. It tells them, you're not the only one. It tells them, there is language for this. It tells them, what you're feeling makes sense. It tells them, your life is not over because of this chapter. And that can be enough. As we come towards the end of this episode, I want to invite you to sit with this one question. What part of your story are you beginning to understand differently now? Not what you already are ready to share, not what you have fully healed, not what lesson can you package neatly for someone else. Just this. What part of your story are you beginning to understand differently now? Maybe it's a moment you judged yourself for. Maybe it's a choice you made. Maybe it's something you endured. Maybe it's a silence you kept. Maybe it's a version of yourself you have been ashamed of. Maybe it's a chapter you thought meant one thing, but now you're beginning to see it through kinder eyes. You don't have to answer quickly. You don't have to answer publicly. Just notice. Notice what comes up. Notice where there's still pain. Notice where there is a little more softness than there used to be. Notice where meaning may be beginning to form, because the story does not end with the moment. It deepens when we give it meaning. It changes when we stop letting shame be the narrator. It softens when we bring compassion to the parts of ourselves that were doing their best. It becomes powerful when we realise that what happened to us is not all we are. And perhaps in time, it becomes something that helps someone else feel less alone. Thank you for being here on this final episode of the 10-part series of Not Just a Story. If today's reflection has stirred something in you, I invite you to sit with it gently. Write a few words. Take a breath. Let the meaning come slowly. And if there's a story in you that you are beginning to understand differently, perhaps this is the beginning of giving it a voice. Not the performance, not for approval, but because your story matters, and it may mean more than you know.
Thank you for listening to Not Just a Story with Rose Davidson. If something in this episode stayed with you, you're invited to reflect on your own story, in your own way, in your own time. And if you feel ready, you can share your story through the Impactful Voice Project at rosedavidson.com.au. This is a space where lived experience is honored and stories are shared with care. Until next time, your story matters.